There's something hiding behind the sun. Our sun has been acting up lately. Storms, flares, coronal mass ejections. I was told it was natural, nothing to worry about. We were just in a solar cycle, and storms on the sun would get worse for a few more years until the cycle peaked, and gradually, solar activity will return to normal. But it's not so benign. At first I thought the folks at NASA were keeping things hush-hush because of a potential Carrington event, a solar storm so powerful that it sends enough radiation to Earth to melt the energy grid and send us back into the Dark Ages. As horrifying as that sounds, such an event would be a comfort compared to the truth. Right now, I'm around 94 million miles from Earth. Some of you will realize about where that places me. We expected things to go bad, but not like this. Just a few hours ago, things were still normal. Our spaceship is so damn cramped. No, that's an understatement. It's coffin cramped. We sleep in bunks so tightly stacked that my nose touches the fabric of the cot above me. Coffin cramped. I'd called it that since launch, but the irony is just beginning to dawn on me. There were 4 of us in the crew. Me, Margot, Ted, and Jin. At 1400 hours today, I felt like I was a little boy again, bickering with my sister on an airplane over the sunshade. But this was, of course, a little different. "Please, Margot," I begged. "We're restricted from opening any ports after 50 million miles. It's my job to enforce shit like this. I'm not trying to be the bad guy." I was trying to act like I didn't want her to open the port covering our spacecraft's only window because I was a bureaucrat. In reality, I was terrified of getting toasted by cosmic radiation. She gave me a pitying look. It was an expression that the rest of the crew had been giving me more and more as the mission went on. They knew more than me. I didn't get the same security clearance briefing as they did. I knew we were looking to retrieve an experimental probe that went dead in orbit around the sun, and that the plan was to retrieve the data it failed to relay and boomerang home using the sun. All in all, the mission would take most of a year. But I didn't get to know all the details. I'm not even an astronaut. I'm a hired gun. I spent a dozen years in the Army Special Forces, retiring as a captain. My selection for this mission should have been the first red flag. But I was too busy thinking how awesome it would be to get to space. Besides, I made a living by not asking questions. I was told I would be the security specialist for the spaceflight. I thought maybe all long missions needed someone like me. It made sense when you thought about it. You put 4 people in a tube for almost a year, and fights are due to break out. Believe it or not, astronauts are not all timid geniuses. There are some gravitational egos floating around Earth's orbit in the ISS. My job was to keep everybody in check. Follow the rules, be civil, or Murphy will handcuff you for a timeout. But 30 days before launch, I was given a list. Things to look out for, signs and symptoms, and I realized I was not just here to keep the peace. Of the more concerning bullet points were things such as: if any crew members experience bleeding that could be hemorrhagic, blood seeping from ears, eyes, nose, or starts speaking in a strange way, mutterings a throaty tone that sounds like another language, immediately quarantine them in the ECP. ECP stood for Emergency Containment Pod. In our tight little ship, 6 of these steel coffins were lined up in the wall, opposite our bunks. Every place you could fit a toothpick was important. So it was god-awful concerning why so much space was allotted for those things. But before I saw any of this shit, the lists, the containment pods, the look of doom in the eyes of the other astronauts, the ink was dry. The contract was signed, and unless I wanted to fake an injury, there was no way out. It seemed like NASA was expecting madness on this mission, and my job was to keep it at bay. And the red flags kept coming one after another, like a clown with nothing but crimson scarves up its sleeve. If you're a big space nerd, you may have heard of the Parker Solar Probe. In 2018, a spacecraft the size of a sedan was launched with the intention of uncovering the mysteries of the sun's corona and solar wind, but it discovered something else. The probe went dark 8 months ago. Me, the rest of the crew, and dozens of top scientists and brass were briefed with a PowerPoint composed of blurry images. Now, the pictures weren't in 4K. The probe uses white light imaging that gives photos a grainy look, like you're looking at a Loch Ness monster. But with the help of the projector and nervous men with their pointer sticks, I was able to understand what I was looking at. There was a black and white blur of stars in the background, and coming out of them, streaked by the speed at which it traveled, was something that looked like a screaming human face. And it was coming right for the probe. It was the last image it took. Sounds kind of funny, doesn't it? But the room was quiet with fear. No one seemed to offer an explanation for why the object that disabled the probe gave us all a bad case of facial pareidolia. Its hollow eyes weren't level, and its mouth was jagged. I thought it could be passed off as some kind of solar radiation interference. After all, no spacecraft or camera had ever been so close to the sun. But I didn't raise my hand. I sat quietly confused as they started talking about the distances between the eyes and mouth. Distances. In the picture, the thing looked close, like it might be 20 feet long. The room came alive with nervous murmurs as they concluded that the facial object that appeared in front of the probe was roughly the size of the Pacific Ocean. Were traveling gas clouds a thing? Or, of course, radiation interferences? But I didn't ask these questions. It felt like every obvious answer was out of the window. Otherwise, the room wouldn't have felt so eerie. They told us the probe was not destroyed and it was lingering in orbit, and our crew had the Herculean task of retrieving it. I was given a folder of the general mission plan, and then dismissed along with dozens of others with lower security clearance while the rest of the crew stayed sitting. I thought maybe they were going into technical details that I wouldn't understand. But as the days and meetings went on, and from the tip-lipped smiles I got in the halls, I knew I was told half of the truth. Looking at it now, it wouldn't have made a difference. Up until hours ago, I still knew nothing. Margot ignored my pleas to not open the sunshade and set her hands on the window switch. Visors, guys. The whole group was equipped with a gold visor. Sunglasses on steroids, as we called them. They allowed us to look out the window without being blinded by the sun. Hell, they were so effective we could stare at the sun if we so wished. Ted and Jin nodded and donned their giant bug-eyed glasses. It was beginning to feel like we were on a suicide mission, and I was the only one still ignorant of the fact. The cosmic radiation from the window, even for a few minutes, could cause serious complications down the line. I didn't say anything. I nodded gently, defeated. I flipped my goggles on and Margot hit the switch. An alarm sounded and the metal shade began to slip into the wall. We were all silenced by what we saw. No, my blood didn't run cold, nor did my hand stand on end, at least not from fear. 17 million miles away sat our sun, a silent ball of fire, burning almost white against the blackness of space. From as close as we were, we could see the firestorm slowly swirling on its surface, systems of flames the size of Earth. I'm done. Words can't do it justice. Mountains, stars, Even the aurora borealis swimming pink paled in comparison to this view. The four of us had a moment gathered around the window. 4 faces pressed against the porthole, looking at the beauty so incredible, it was truly indescribable. It was a while before any of us spoke. "Should probably close this up," said Jin. "Radiation and all." "Yeah," Ted snapped to attention like he'd been in a trance. The alarm blared and the metal shade returned to cover the glass. But I kept staring at where the sun just was. Ted and Jin went back to the tiny table that folded out of the wall where their poker hands had dealt, but untouched, and looked at one another. It'd been 122 days since launch, and we were sick of talking to one another. An hour went by and I tried to read, but quickly found myself getting warm. "Ted, can you turn up the cold air? These cooling units aren't meant to last much longer than the mission. We've got to save it for when it gets really hot." "Is this not really hot?" Ted ignored me and I looked at the rest of the crew, but they just shrugged. "Whatever," I muttered and started to read again. But 20 minutes later my stomach dropped. I was sweating so much I had to wipe my brow. There was a sheen of sweat on the back of my hand. I looked up with alarm and immediately locked eyes with Margot. She had her fingertip in front of her as she stared at a bead of sweat resting on the tip. It was getting hot far too fast. Before I spoke, the comm station crackled to life with an electronic voice. "Message incoming. We were so far from Earth that radio transmission weren't instant. This billion-dollar spaceship used what was essentially a fax machine to communicate with Earth." The screen lit up with big letters we could all see. "Base jumper. Confirm your speed and location." Ted rose from his seat with a start. "I told you it was too hot," I muttered. "Shut up." He went to the cockpit and checked some of the instruments before quickly speed-walking back to the comm station. He typed furiously and spoke over his shoulder to us. "We're off course and gaining speed." "What? You can't be serious. How much speed?" Ted leaned back from the screen, biting his lip. 200,000 kilometers an hour. "Jesus," said Jin. "That's the increase, not the total. We're at 320,000 now." Margot climbed into the cockpit and Ted took a seat next to her. Jin went to the instruments wall just behind them and started giving readings. Everybody had a job here except for me. "We're being pulled in," Ted shouted. "Cabin temperature rising 2.3 Celsius a minute," Jin said calmly. "Don't worry, folks. This thing is meant to withstand the heat from re-entry. A little sunshine ain't no thing," said Ted, but I could tell he was trying to be the man in charge. There was terror in his wide, darting eyes. "Engage starboard thrusters. Sunside, sunside." Margot flipped a series of switches. "Thrusters engaged." "Give him it all!" Margot eased the throttle all the way up and the starboard wall began to roar. Although there was no difference in gravity or feeling, I clung to the pole that supported our bunks like my life depended on it. 3.4 Celsius a minute, sir. I need to blast the cooling or we're gonna bake." "Do it." Jin furiously clicked the button, sending the AC temp as low as it would go. It blew freezing air into the cabin. With the sound of the thrusters and the cooling system, everyone put their radio sets on. I grabbed my headset off my bunk and moved the mic in front of my mouth. "It just doesn't make sense. The thrusters changed our course by 0.1 degrees. We've already reverted." "Maybe there was a malfunction," said Margot. "Fuel levels suggest normal activation and all thrusters sensors indicate they made it into position." "Jin," said Ted, "how long can that cooling system keep us at a non-lethal temp?" "Depends. If you want to be smart, but uncomfortable. I can set it to keep the temp below 35 Celsius. We'd be hot, but we'd live. Do it. Roger. Everybody was silent for a moment, and I hesitated to speak. Elements are a funny thing, and I was out of mine. I'm confident under gunfire when there's no evac, yet I felt like a child as these astronauts assessed the situation. So, what's the problem? We're still off course. I don't have control of the ship, said Ted. Margot, Jin, and him all looked at each other. There was some kind of understanding in their eyes, a knowingness that this may happen. Think we're at the farm? Margot asked Ted, and he nodded ever so slightly. What's the farm? I asked. I didn't care about sounding naive anymore. I was afraid. We're in a tractor beam. Ted flipped some switches off. The sound of the AC and the thrusters lessened, and he slipped off his headset and stood. We're being pulled by something. You people have to talk to me. To where? Into the sun. Margot and Jin looked defeated. Ted opened the drawer in the wall that acted as his footlocker and pulled out a brown bottle of rum. Want to switch off the comm station, Jin? I swear we're fucking bugged. Oh. Jin powered down the comm station, and the lit up buttons all went dark. What's it matter anyway? Why are you all so calm? I sprang into the middle of the craft. I was beginning to get angry. I had been the dumbest guy in the room for more than 100 days, and no one pretended otherwise. I was damn near a breaking point. Murphy. Ted twisted the cork out of the rum bottle with an echoey pop. This wasn't a suicide mission, I want you to know that. Jin held out a plastic cup and Ted splashed some rum in. Something has been hiding behind the sun. Some structure. We know it can move, since the sun does too, and somehow it always manages to stay hidden. Ted sighed, grabbed a plastic cup, filled it and put it in my hand. But I didn't drink it. He sighed. That probe that was launched a few years ago, the one we were supposed to retrieve, it wasn't sent to study solar activity. It was sent to figure out what the hell our radar was detecting, and why ever since the structure appeared, the sun has been going crazy with solar flares. To be honest, we still don't know, but we have a pretty good idea on what's happening. We have a theory. And what's the theory? The three of them looked at each other, and I set my rum down. We think our sun is being mined. Mined? For energy. I know. Why this sun when there are so many others without intelligent species in orbit? But we figure that they're so advanced they don't care. Our sun was probably closest. The next gas station, so to speak. We're only theorizing here, but based on the strange and concerning strong solar activity that's built up in the last few years, we can tell that something is affecting the energy of our star. So you don't know if any of this is true. What about the symptoms list I received? Where'd that come from? The International Space Station is empty. Evacuated. The astronauts there, they started bleeding and going mad just when the Parker space probe captured that image. Hardly anyone knows it, but we are the only human beings in space right now. And Murphy, I really think you should drink that rum. I picked up my cup and drank the rum in one swift gulp. I held the cup out for more. Why me? I mean, there were so many others to pick for this shit. You'd be shocked at what percent of the special forces fails the psyche eval for going to space. Actually, I wouldn't, I said, and we all laughed. What else could we do? We talked theories for the next few hours. What these aliens were doing. What they needed the fuel for. A couple of times Margot or Ted would head to the controls and try to deviate from our path. or change our speed. But it was clear we were in the power of something else. Despite it all, I actually had a good time. We had human need for levity in the face of death, and we quickly found ourselves drunk and laughing in hysterics. "Okay, brass tacks everyone," said Jin after some hours as the laughter cooled after a joke. "We can't burn to death, and that's exactly what's going to happen if we stay on this course. There's no way we can make it quick by using the sun. Votes on cutting off the oxygen versus overriding the airlock." "Oxygen," said Margot, and we all agreed. Oxygen. "Alrighty," said Jin, and I smirked then. I did not think my death would be decided with an alrighty, but after being in the fray so many years, it felt right. I was surprised how well the crew was taking this. They were properly selected. There was no panic. A couple minutes later, Jin got up from the table. We didn't realize he did then, but over the next few minutes our breaths became shallower and shallower. "Wait," said Margot. She was suddenly swaying. "Jin, did you already?" But before she could finish her sentence, she hit the floor hard. There was terror in my mind for sure, but I did my best to ignore it. We typically don't discover this until the final seconds of our lives, but the human mind is an expert in experiencing death. I remember for some reason then, drunk and oxygen deprived, I was thinking of waking up with the window open on a Sunday morning. It was a memory I had from high school. Birds singing, bells tolling, a girl's arm gently curled on top of my chest. I was ready to die. But just then, something heavy hit the roof of the spacecraft. Sparks burst from the control panels and materials flew from their compartments, but it wasn't enough to keep me conscious. I fell to the floor and the world went dark. I woke to a shade being drawn, darkness and then white, unbearable light. It was the sunshade. I was still on the ship. Jin and Ted were on the floor, both on their backs. I stood clumsily over them. "Guys!" I reached down to shake them but froze. Their eyes were gone, and so were their brains beyond. Red, hollow sockets. These men had the eyes of jack-o'-lanterns. "Fuck, fuck!" I screamed. "Shh!" My head snapped towards the source of the sound. Margot was standing at the porthole, staring out into the sun. "Margot?" It brings tears to my eyes every time. I mean, just look at that. I could see the sun out of the porthole, but I wasn't blinded. Why can't I see it? I touched my eyes, half expecting them to be gone. "Because I want you to. But there are more important questions," she whistled a peaceful melody, still not turning from the glass. "I want to share something with you. This view. Come." I looked down at Ted and Jin. I had this horrible fear that my eyes were melting too. What happened to Ted and Jin? This is only supposed to be shared with one. It's a polite protocol. What is? Letting you know why. It's a painful thing to have to wonder. At least one of you shouldn't. One of you should know. And I'm going to tell you. Starting at the beginning, but keeping it brief. I said nothing. Look at all those stars. I looked beyond the sun to where thousands of stars twinkled, and Margot continued. Every creature I've ever encountered thinks it's beautiful. Their world, the universe, and God, I do too. Gorgeous, she hissed. Absolutely gorgeous. If only this feeling could be bottled, sold, enforced. The scale of space, The beauty of it all makes greed and worldly power seem so silly. I shifted on my feet uneasily. I had a handgun for emergencies and started towards my locker drawer to grab it. You would think a species could evolve past such things. But that's the fatal flaw poisoning the purity of all things. You see, even when life reaches the level of sentience to appreciate goodness and beauty, it still can never leave nature behind. The primal drive to accumulate power, the high that comes with it, the subjugation of the weak, the slaughtering of the unknown, the slaughtering of anything that could be a threat, all those basic instincts remain. Margot was still facing the window, and I started thumbing the combination into the lock. Your species did not win its way to the top of the food chain with song and dance. There is no solar system where intelligence ever has. So, all who wonder at the natural world in which they inhabit are built with the cruelty it requires to take it, to lay waste to the competition, and those instincts, and the need to implement them, can't be erased. There is no technology or time elapsed from when we were beasts to rid us of our want to win at all costs. Margot, I stopped fiddling with the combination lock and looked at her back. This is no time for philosophy. I'm not philosophizing, she turned then, and I blanched as I saw that her eyes were pupilless orbs. Something swam in them like parasites. I'm apologizing. What? I stuttered. She was one of them. An alien. Anything but human. You can't have it, I shouted. Take as much energy as you need. Please, please. Energy. I realized Margot's mouth wasn't moving. She was slack-jawed. Her voice came from inside my head. We're not here for energy. I'm sorry. To you and your people. Suddenly the top of Margot's head popped and a slick metal pole that had been coming from the roof slinked out. It paused in the ceiling, creating a barrier from the vacuum of space. Margot's body fell lifeless to the floor. Her eyeballs had been sucked into her skull, just like Jin and Ted. She had never been speaking. She's been dead the whole time. Whatever spoke was what had been hiding behind the sun. I thought about going to the comm station then. Its lights were still on. I could connect to the internet and send out a message to tell others. And I have. You're reading it. But before I did, something seemed to call me to the window. I could see some kind of obelisk structure nearly touching the sun. It was enormous, with emerald lights shining down its length. But then I noticed it had something like tentacles that were reaching into the sun. Where they connected to the surface, angry storms of fire swirled. I understood what they were apologizing for. The sun wasn't being mined. No, the words of that thing rang in my head. The slaughtering of the unknown. The slaughtering of everything that could be a threat. I stared at the sun, and from fear or beauty or both, I began to cry. They were increasing the sun's activity. The solar storms suddenly all made sense. Soon our star would go supernova. The sun wasn't being mined. No, they were turning it into a bomb.